Welcome back, Focus Learners. Okay, today we are diving into a really fascinating explainer. We're looking at a massive, modern-day geopolitical puzzle that's literally unfolding right in front of us. I'm talking about the unprecedented spread of foreign military bases across the entire African continent. From the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, global powers are quietly setting up camp. But to really understand what's going on today, our sources suggest we actually need to look backwards. We need to look at the shadows of the past and explore exactly why old colonial-era tactics are heavily influencing this massive current military expansion.
So, right off the bat, we've got to ask the big question. Why are foreign militaries suddenly multiplying in Africa? The research we're unpacking today points out that this isn't just some sudden random rush for global security. Instead, they give us a really compelling way to look at it. Imagine a giant web of invisible economic strings. We're talking trade routes, resource extraction, massive data flows, all stretching across the continent. Well, to keep those invisible strings tightly secured, foreign powers drop heavy physical anchors. And those anchors? Those are the military bases.
To actually decode this, our sources point us toward a very specific historical lens, and that is neocolonialism. This term was coined by Kwame Nkrumah, the first prime minister and president of Ghana. He described it as, and I quote, "power without responsibility and exploitation without redress." Basically, this means we can't just look at these military outposts in isolation. We're looking at how historical tactics, the exact same ones used to extract wealth from Africa during the colonial era, have simply evolved into a much more modern, highly sophisticated system of control today.
Section 1. The Old Colonial Blueprint.
If we trace the history of foreign intervention, you can see this incredibly clear evolution. Back in 1897, you had direct, brutal force. Think of the British using machine guns to capture Benin and just outright impose colonial rule. Fast forward a bit to the Cold War, and the strategy shifted, right? It became about setting up containment bases as the US and the Soviets battled for global influence. Then, post 9/11, the entire narrative shifted again to the global war on terror, which justified a massive new footprint. And that brings us right to today's strategic expansion, where global powers are positioning themselves for a totally new era of geopolitical competition.
But here's the thing. While the justifications keep changing, from civilizing missions to containment to counterterrorism, the sources highlight one enduring truth across all of these eras. Force enables economic extraction. The fundamental goal has literally always remained the exact same. Military might, whether we're talking about direct colonial troops from a century ago or modern foreign bases today, is ultimately deployed to secure wealth and protect trade routes.
Section 2. Economics of Neocolonialism.
Now, what's really interesting here is the staggering scale of the wealth at stake. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Africa holds more than 50% of global cobalt reserves, 80% of the world's phosphate, and a whopping 95% of its platinum. These are the critical minerals that power our entire modern world. Think about the smartphone in your pocket right now, or all those electric vehicles hitting the roads. They rely completely on these materials. So naturally, this incredible natural endowment draws in foreign powers who desperately need cheap, reliable access to these raw materials to keep fueling their own industrialized economies.
But it is fascinating to see how this wealth actually gets extracted today, right? Without the formal empires of the past. It happens through modern extraction tactics. First up, consider land grabs. Foreign investors have scooped up nearly 35 million hectares of land in developing nations just since 2006. That is a massive amount of territory, and it often leaves local populations struggling. Second is monetary control. The most visible example is the CFA franc, which is a currency system that historically forced former French colonies to deposit massive reserves in France, completely stunting local economic integration. And finally, there's digital colonialism. A staggering 80% of Africa's internet traffic is routed and stored overseas. That means even behavioral data, which is essentially the raw material of the 21st century, is extracted and monetized abroad.
Section 3. Bases as modern enforcers. So when foreign powers set up bases today, there is a very stark contrast between what is actually said and what the data shows. The stated goals? They are almost always about fighting terrorism, providing humanitarian aid, or ensuring regional stability. But the research we're unpacking today suggests the underlying goal is much more traditional. It's about protecting lucrative resource routes and projecting global power. When we hear that word security, this explainer is really asking us to think critically and ask one simple question: security for whom?
And this isn't just one country's playbook. It's a crowded, complex geopolitical chessboard. France uses its military to maintain its historical France-Afrique sphere of influence. The United States has established a vast counter-terrorism footprint. Russia, through groups like the Wagner mercenaries, who are now rebranded as the Africa Corps, by the way, they secure mining rights and direct exchange for regime protection. And China is increasingly looking to secure its massive Belt and Road infrastructure investments. The sources clearly note that regardless of their different ideologies, all these external powers utilize surprisingly similar military tactics to secure their distinct economic interests on the continent.
Section 4. Propping up unpopular regimes.
There's this quote directly from the academic research that literally hits the nail on the head here. It states, "The military bases and troops were utilized to safeguard regimes that served foreign interests. By establishing these physical locations, foreign powers often find themselves shielding autocrats from their own people. This ensures that the host country's leadership remains compliant and, more importantly, friendly to foreign economic agendas."
It is essentially a transaction. You are exchanging sovereignty for regime survival. The sources highlight how French forces historically protected leaders like Paul Biya in Cameroon, which helped safeguard French economic interests in the region. And more recently, Russian private military companies have adopted a very similar model in places like the Central African Republic. They guard the ruling regime against domestic opposition in direct exchange for incredibly lucrative access to gold and diamond mines.
Section 5. The illusion of security. Here is the really dark paradox of all this foreign intervention. The research shows that as military actions increase, the consequences actually worsen regional instability. It's kind of wild. Drone strikes launched from bases in places like Djibouti have been linked directly to neighboring violence and massive refugee flows. Arming allied regimes? Well, that often leads to the proliferation of illicit weapons when those arms inevitably end up in the wrong hands. Ultimately, the data reveals that as foreign bases have expanded under the banner of fighting terror, militancy has actually increased and the continent as a whole has become significantly more unsettled.
So the crucial point the sources emphasize here is that ordinary citizens are the ones paying the price for these massive geopolitical chess games. The collateral damage is severe. Foreign troops often operate with legal impunity, meaning crimes committed against locals just go unpunished in host country courts. The presence of foreign backing stifles organic democratic movements. Closed-off military bases cause unmonitored environmental damage, and honestly, perhaps most dangerously, placing multiple global powers in such close proximity risks importing foreign rivalries, like the whole geopolitical tension between the US and China, directly onto African soil.
Section 6. Reclaiming African sovereignty.
But hey, the narrative doesn't end with just passive acceptance. Not at all. We're actually seeing a multi-layered reclamation of sovereignty unfolding right now. Step 1 is rejecting subordination. We've recently seen countries in the Sahel, like Mali and Niger, just outright expel French and US troops. They're signaling that these subordinate military relationships are no longer acceptable. Step 2 is economic assertiveness. Governments are leveraging their bargaining power. For instance, Kenya recently canceled a major highway contract with a French firm over cost concerns. And step 3 is digital sovereignty. Nations like South Africa are implementing really robust data protection laws, like PAPIA, to prevent digital colonialism and keep their citizens' data safely out of foreign hands. As we wrap up this explainer, it's pretty clear that the legacy of those old colonial tactics remains deeply, deeply intertwined with today's foreign military presence. Which leaves us with one incredibly powerful, lingering question to consider. Can true, equitable development ever really happen under the shadow of foreign guns? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, Focused Learners. Keep questioning those invisible strings, and I will see you in the next explainer.